Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Amanda's hands trembled as she pulled the photograph from her leather-bound folder, her usually steady composure fractured by the weight of the truth she was about to release into the world. And as she set the image on the polished oak table in front of Victor, the silence in the room became so heavy it was suffocating, every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner echoing like a warning bell, while Victor's piercing eyes, which for decades had faced down corporate enemies, family betrayals, and the most brutal battles a man of power could endure, widened in a way that suggested he was not prepared for what he was seeing. Not this, not now, because the photograph Amanda revealed was not just some blurred snapshot or vague piece of evidence. It was a chilling, undeniable window into the past, a frozen moment that captured Dumas in a way no one had ever imagined, with a face twisted not by age or time but by guilt, pain, and a connection to a secret that Victor had buried so deep he prayed it would never crawl back into the light. Yet here it was staring back at him in black and white, sharp, unforgiving, and loaded with meaning, and Victor, the man who so rarely let his emotions break the surface, felt his throat tighten and his chest cave as hot tears formed against his will, slipping down the stone-cold mask he had worn for so many years, shocking Amanda into silence, because even she, with all her cunning and her calculated timing, had not expected to see the titan of industry, the patriarch of power, reduced to a man grieving a ghost that refused to stay dead. And the photo itself, oh, it told a story louder than any confession ever could, showing Dumas standing at the edge of a ruined village decades earlier, his uniform stained, his eyes hollow, holding a child whose face was smeared with soot and fear, a child who bore an uncanny resemblance to someone Amanda knew very well, someone whose DNA had been whispered about in closed corridors but never confirmed. And suddenly the entire conspiracy of bloodlines, betrayals, and hidden wars came flooding back with such intensity that Victor had to grip the table to steady himself, his knuckles white, his breath uneven, as memories he had worked his whole life to suppress came roaring into focus. Nights filled with the sounds of gunfire and betrayal, mornings where he woke in cold sweats remembering the smell of smoke and the cries of children, and the one man he had trusted above all others. Dumas, not only betraying that trust but shaping the course of his entire destiny in ways Victor had never dared articulate, because that child in the photograph was not just some nameless victim of war, it was the missing piece, the broken link in a chain of lies that tied Amanda's present to Victor's past. And in that single moment, Amanda's eyes sharpened with vindication as she leaned forward, her voice low but laced with fire, whispering that the world deserved to know what Victor had hidden, that his legacy was not built on strength alone but on silence, compromise, and the ghosts of the innocent. And Victor, still staring at the image with tears dripping freely now, could not find the strength to answer, because deep down he knew that the picture Amanda placed before him was not merely evidence of Dumas' dark history but a mirror reflecting his own complicity. His own desperate attempt to rewrite history by pretending certain nights never happened, certain screams were never heard, certain children were never lost. And as he finally lifted his gaze from the damning photo to meet Amanda's fiery stare, his voice cracked, the sound raw and stripped of all the power he usually carried, as he asked her one single, shattering question. Where did you get this? And that was when Amanda knew she had him, knew that the cracks in Victor's armor were finally visible, because the truth wasn't just in the photograph, it was in the tears streaking down the cheeks of a man who had thought himself untouchable, a man who now realized that no matter how high he climbed, the past had claws sharp enough to drag him back down into the shadows. And as Amanda prepared to unleash the full story, the names, the dates, the cover-ups, and the shocking revelation about who that child truly grew up to be, Victor sat broken before her, his mind a whirlwind of guilt, rage, and unbearable sorrow, unable to deny that Dumas' secret past was now his present nightmare, one that no amount of wealth or power could erase. Yet even as Amanda leaned into this seismic revelation, her mind was not immune to distraction, because across town her name was already on people's lips for reasons entirely different, with Devon's cheating scandal spreading through whispers and leaks that threatened to paint Amanda as the next storm on the horizon. And though she had come here today to stand strong, expose Victor's buried sins, and finally free herself from the shadows of Dumas' past, the irony was that her own personal life was unraveling in ways she could no longer control, because Devon Winter's betrayal with Abby had left a wound in her heart that never truly healed, And now with Lily confiding in him about Kane Ashby, Nate warning him to tread carefully, and the gossip surrounding Mariah, Tessa, and Daniel creating ripple effects that touched every corner of their circle, Amanda felt herself dangerously close to the edge of a temptation she had vowed never to fall into again, the kind of temptation that could undo everything she had rebuilt. And the way Devon's name now mixed with hers in the chatter of Genoa City was enough to make her chest tighten with something that wasn't just anger but longing, because in soap operas, betrayal never exists in a vacuum. It comes back, it festers, it flips the script, and as Amanda's eyes lingered on Victor's tears, she couldn't help but think about the ones she herself had shed when Devon chose Abby over her. A choice that shattered her faith but did not destroy her love, not completely, because even now the idea of slipping back into Devon's orbit, a stolen look, a whispered word, a dangerous kiss, lingered in the back of her mind like a song she couldn't stop humming. And maybe it was fate that while Victor confronted the sins of Dumas, she was about to confront her own. Because as shocking as this photograph was, as devastating as Victor's tears had become, the even bigger twist waiting in the wings was not just the identity of the child in the photo, but the reality that Amanda's affair might be brewing even now, poised to detonate at the exact wrong time, intertwining her fate with Victor's collapse and Devon's downfall in ways no one could yet predict. And so the air in that room stayed thick, charged with grief and revelation. But Amanda knew the next storm wasn't only about Dumas' secret past. It was about her own future, one that threatened to explode in scandal, betrayal, and heartbreak, leaving every player shattered in its wake. Victor's chest rose and fell unevenly as the photograph seemed to burn into his very soul. And though Amanda's words rang in his ears like a verdict being delivered in some cosmic courtroom, his mind was already racing ahead, darting from memory to memory, trying to reconcile the man he once called a brother-in-arms with the specter now glaring at him from the glossy surface of the evidence Amanda had so coldly placed on his desk. And as he reached for his handkerchief to dab the tears that betrayed his control, he whispered a prayer that the walls of his empire were strong enough to contain this implosion, because he could already feel the storm Amanda had unleashed bleeding outward, not just threatening his reputation but threatening to undo the very scaffolding of loyalty, secrecy, and silence upon which his empire had been built. And Amanda, her resolve trembling but intact, leaned back in her chair and folded her arms with the measured grace of a woman who knew she had detonated a truth bomb that could level even the most impenetrable fortress. Yet beneath her calm surface another storm swirled, a personal, dangerous storm tied to her heart, because as Victor broke under the weight of the photograph, Amanda's thoughts, unbidden, darted to Devon, to the whispers circulating about his cheating, the looks Abby had given her when they crossed paths, and the unspoken question that lingered between them. Would Amanda, betrayed once, betrayed twice, now step into the very scandal she had once condemned? Would she herself become the unfaithful one, drawn by the very magnetic pull of forbidden temptation that had once destroyed her trust? And though she tried to push Devon's name from her mind in this moment of righteous confrontation, she could not, because part of her knew that what she had just done to Victor, forcing him to look at a truth he wanted to bury, was not so different from what she might soon be forced to do to herself, because the truth about her feelings for Devon had never truly died. It had only been buried beneath her ambition, her anger, and her determination to stand tall. And now, with Devon's name already sliding into the same gossip streams that were once devoted to Victor's enemies, Amanda wondered if fate was aligning her downfall with Victor's, two legacies collapsing in parallel under the unbearable weight of secrets. And the thought chilled her, because if Devon reached for her, if he whispered that he missed her, if he confessed that Abby was not enough, would she resist or would she crumble? And wasn't that the very definition of irony, that in exposing Victor for trying to rewrite his past, she was blind to the way she was about to repeat her own mistakes, trapped in a cycle of betrayal that could destroy her reputation, her career, and her heart once more, while across town Lily Winters, unaware of the photographic storm Amanda had unleashed, was sitting with Nate in Chancellor Winters' offices, voicing her unease that Kane was once again finding ways to inch into her life, stirring up memories she didn't want to face. And Nate, ever the pragmatist, warned her that if she wasn't careful, Kane's charm could drag her back into old patterns, the very patterns that Devon would be powerless to stop, because Devon himself was distracted, juggling not only Lily's confessions and Nate's warnings but also the fallout from Mariah and Tessa's disintegrating marriage, the unexpected curveball of Daniel's secrets. And now, The gnawing sense that Amanda was not done with him, that her absence in body did not mean absence in spirit. And Abby, watching Devon's restlessness grow by the day, feared that the very foundation of her marriage was not as solid as she once believed, because every time Devon's phone lit up with a name from the past, every time he grew distant after a long conversation about Lily's woes, Abby wondered if Amanda's shadow still lingered, and the irony of it all was staggering. Amanda Sinclair, the woman who had just shattered Victor Newman's defenses with a photograph that peeled back decades of deceit, was herself standing on the edge of becoming the very scandal she despised, because when she saw Victor's tears, when she saw that moment of raw humanity, she was reminded that even the strongest, most disciplined men falter, and if Victor Newman could fall apart, what made her think she was immune? And so the scene in that room stretched into eternity, Amanda waiting for Victor to find words, Victor drowning in ghosts, the photograph sitting like a curse between them, but beneath the surface the soap opera heartbeat throbbed faster, because this wasn't just about a past betrayal involving Dumas. It was about how past betrayals echo into the present, how Devon's infidelity with Abby still bled into Amanda's heart, how Amanda's suppressed desire might soon erupt into an affair that would mirror the very scandal she had sworn to rise above, how Lily's fear of Cain was about to intersect with Devon's distraction, how Nate's warnings might be ignored, and how Abby's fragile confidence might be shattered the moment she discovered Amanda and Devon's unresolved tension rekindled in a single, dangerous night. And while Victor whispered Dumas' name with bitterness, his tears still flowing, Amanda realized that exposing one man's past sins might cost her the stability of her own future, because in soaps the truth never comes in pieces, it comes like an avalanche, burying everyone in its path. And in this case, Dumas' photograph, Victor's tears, Amanda's temptation, Devon's guilt, Abby's insecurity, Lily's fears, and Nate's suspicions were all threads in the same unraveling tapestry, one that promised to leave every player gasping for air when the final knot came undone. And so as Victor asked again in a voice even weaker than before, "Where did you get this?" Amanda hesitated for the first time, because suddenly she wasn't just a crusader exposing the sins of men, she was a woman at a crossroads, realizing that the next scandal might not be Victor's to carry, it might be hers. Amanda's chest tightened as Victor's gaze, still locked on the photograph, flickered between disbelief and anguish, and though she had spent countless hours rehearsing how she would confront him, nothing had prepared her for the raw, unfiltered humanity that spilled from the man who had once seemed untouchable, a man whose tears now traced paths down his weathered face like rivers of regret. And as she watched, part of her felt an unexpected pang of sympathy, a whisper in the back of her mind, telling her that even the strongest men, even the most calculating patriarchs, were not immune to the consequences of buried secrets, yet she could not allow herself to linger in that emotion, because elsewhere in Genoa City, another storm was brewing, one that threatened to eclipse even the revelation she had just forced upon Victor, because Devon Winter's betrayal had left an indelible mark on her heart, a wound that refused to heal, and the whispers circulating about his infidelity with Abby had created a tension in the air, a sense of impending doom that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. And now, as she sat across from Victor, she realized with chilling clarity that exposing one man's sins might soon collide with the sins of another, and that collision could be catastrophic, because the same impulsive heart that had driven her to confront Victor might very well lead her to a temptation she had once swore she would resist, a temptation named Devon, whose presence in her life, though physically distant, felt closer than ever thanks to the scandal that had once shattered their trust. And as Victor finally lifted his gaze to meet hers, his eyes clouded with grief and a silent accusation, Amanda felt a shiver run down her spine, because she knew that in that room, two lives were poised on the edge of upheaval, his legacy and her morality, both teetering precariously, and just as Victor's lips parted to speak, to confess, to defend himself against the tidal wave of revelation she had unleashed, her thoughts betrayed her, drifting to the memory of Devon's hands brushing hers in the past, the stolen moments, the whispered apologies, and the spark that had never truly died. And the irony was not lost on her that while she had made a man like Victor Newman weep with a single photograph, she was powerless to contain the storm rising within her own heart, a storm fueled by longing, resentment, and the unrelenting ache of betrayal. And even as she tried to focus, trying to remind herself that Victor's secrets had consequences far beyond her own desires, her mind refused to obey, replaying scenes of Devon in intimate conversation with Abby, The way his voice had carried a tenderness that she remembered as hers alone. The way he had once looked at her as if the world could fall apart and they would still be standing. And suddenly the weight of responsibility pressed down on her again. Because if she allowed herself to feel even an iota of that old desire, the consequences could be disastrous, not just for her, but for Abby, for Devon, for Lily, for Kane, and even for Victor, whose empire she had just shaken to its core. And in the same heartbeat, she recognized the cruel symmetry of the moment, that exposing a secret past had the power to destroy a present, that every revelation carried the risk of unintended casualties, and she shivered as the thought of being one of those casualties became a very real possibility, because no one in Genoa City escaped unscathed when temptation and betrayal walked hand in hand, and as she took a slow, deliberate breath to steady herself, Victor's voice broke through the fog, raw and trembling, asking her again, this time with more urgency, "Amanda, what does this mean?" And Amanda's lips parted, ready to explain the entirety of Dumas' past, to expose the hidden truths that tied the present to a shadowy history, yet a fragment of fear held her back, the fear that her own present might unravel at the same time. Because Devon's absence in body did not mean absence in spirit, his memory and the scandal surrounding him hung over her like a spectre, reminding her that she had already been a pawn in the game of love and betrayal, and now, standing at the intersection of Victor's devastation and Devon's impending temptation, she realized that the line between right and wrong was not just blurred, it was obliterated, leaving her to navigate a labyrinth of emotion, power, and moral uncertainty, all at once. And as she watched Victor lean back, his trembling hands gripping the edge of the table, she understood that the impact of her revelation was only the beginning, that exposing Dumas' past would ripple outward in ways she could not yet predict. Because the world of Genoa City thrived on interconnected chaos, where one secret unearthed could ignite 1,000 others. And as if to prove her point, she thought of Abby, pacing in her apartment, sensing Devon's distraction, sensing the tension in his behavior, wondering if the past she had forgiven would return to haunt them both, and Lily, quietly confiding in Nate about Kane, about the emotional tug he still held, unaware that every move she made was being mirrored by forces she could not see, and all the while Devon, caught between his loyalty, his guilt, and the magnetic pull of Amanda's presence in his life, unknowingly poised on the precipice of repeating the mistakes that had once shattered his marriage, and Amanda, knowing all of this, felt a surge of conflicting emotions, a combination of righteous vindication for exposing Victor, fear for the chaos that might erupt from Devon, Abby, and Lily's lives, and the undeniable, irrational longing that made her pulse quicken despite her best intentions. And in that moment, she understood with stark clarity that the photograph on the table was not just a piece of evidence, not just a portal into the sins of the past, but a catalyst, a spark capable of igniting not only Victor's emotional collapse but also the simmering tensions in her own life, a chain reaction that might bring ruin or redemption depending on the choices she made in the next few days. And as Victor's voice shook, imploring her to explain, Amanda felt the weight of every decision she had made, every secret she had kept, every emotion she had buried, pressing down upon her, threatening to crumble her composure even as she prepared to speak, because she knew that once the truth was fully revealed, nothing could be undone. And simultaneously, she knew that resisting Devon, denying the pull of a love she had once thought extinguished, would require strength beyond what she had ever summoned before. And as she glanced at Victor's face, contorted with grief, anger, and disbelief, she realized that the world she was navigating was one where past sins collided with present temptations, where exposure could destroy legacies and hearts in equal measure, and where she, Amanda Sinclair, now stood at the center of a maelstrom, holding in her hands both the power to reveal and the power to resist, the power to heal and the power to hurt. And as the seconds stretched into eternity, she understood that her next move would not only determine Victor's fate but also her own, because the ghosts of Dumas, the echoes of Devon's betrayal, Abby's insecurities, Lily's fears, Kane's relentless charm, and Nate's protective vigilance all converged in that room, a perfect storm of emotion, scandal, and moral complexity. And as she finally opened her mouth, preparing to speak, she knew that what came out next would either save them all or leave a trail of devastation so complete that Genoa City would remember it for decades to come. A legacy of truth, temptation, and turmoil, intertwined and unstoppable. And in that single, suspended moment, Amanda felt the full weight of her power, her danger, and the irreversible consequences of a world where secrets, once unearthed, never slept. Amanda's eyes lingered on Victor, seeing the lines of anguish etched deep into his face, the raw vulnerability he had rarely allowed anyone to witness, and she realized with a mixture of awe and dread that her actions had not just revealed a secret. They had cracked open the very soul of a man who had always seemed invincible. Yet even as she felt the weight of her moral victory, her thoughts kept drifting back to Devon, to the history they shared, to the betrayal that had once left her hollow, and the forbidden yearning that refused to fade. And she understood that in exposing Victor, she had simultaneously exposed herself to a different kind of danger, one far more intimate and perilous.